tell us, what are the 4 key principles companies have to leverage in order to achieve growth and transformation?
There are 4 principles to a detonate mindset. The 4 principles are focus on human behavior. The second principle is bringing a beginner's mind. The third principle is making minimally viable moves. And the fourth is embracing impermanence. The first 2 are about thinking differently. The second 2 about acting differently. And so if you think about focusing on human behavior, any change that you want to make in the world, whether it's a change on your customer or a change to your organization, has to start with some human behaving differently. So they're doing something different than they were before. Either they're perhaps buying your product instead of buying a competitor's product, or it's one of your employees behaving differently than they were before, perhaps to change the culture. It's really critical to adopt a detonate mindset that you understand the behavior that you're trying to change. So get really precise on what you're trying to drive, rather than just say what we're trying to do is grow sales or we're trying to grow revenue. That's too imprecise. What we want to prescribe is what are the customer's behavior that you're going to change that is going to cause your revenue to grow. And to do that in a world where we see technologies changing people's behavior. We see lots of infusion of new and varied competition. To figure out how you could be the cause of that change in behavior, often at times it takes bringing a beginner's mind. And there's a great quote from the world of Zen Buddhism that says, in the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are many. And the idea there is that if all you know is what you're certain of, then you're unlikely to try new things that might change people's behavior. And that's a recipe for being disrupted. So we want to be bringing a beginner's mind. A good example of a company that did this not too long ago was Levi Strauss, when they hired an executive from a different industry, from the world of fast-moving consumer goods, Chip Bergh, to be their new chief executive officer. And at the time that he took the role, Chip understood that there was some angst within the organization about bringing someone from outside the industry in, and his response was, make me an expert. And it was just a good way to promote, some outside-in thinking. And then the other 2 principles are make minimally viable moves, which means that you'll never know if something's going to work that's new to the world unless you try it, and figure out the smallest way to make that move that would cause the least risk.
Do people tend to go too big when they start taking, when they eventually jump off and say, oh, let's try something different, let's take this risk?
That's a great question, and I think that's been the cause of this thing that we see in the world of celebrating failure, right? When people take too big a risk and they waste more money than they needed to get the learning that they need. So we have no issue with doing things new where your hypothesis might be wrong. What we have an issue with is wasting more money than you need to, and then chalking it up to, well, we failed, and don't we all love to fail?
We've learned so much.
We don't love to fail. So a story from the book there is that while I was at Forbes, we sent out 1 million QCATs, and a QCAT was a little device that allowed the reader to scan a barcode on an ad that would take them to a web page that they could get more information, about that ad. That was a very interesting concept to test, and was one that was worthy of learning about. And as it turned out, the product wasn't a success because it wasn't wireless at the time, and as it turned out, we learned that people don't always read their Forbes magazine when tethered to their office desk. They might choose to read it in other settings. We could have had that same learning by sending the QCAT to 30 people and not spending the money in order to do that. So a minimally viable move would have worked well in that situation versus not. And then the fourth principle, the fourth detonate principle, is to embrace impermanence. And here is just simply to say a lot of the reasons why we continue to pursue best practices is because we haven't changed long-standing organization systems and processes that reinforce those behaviors. But if we believe that the world's going to continue to change in the future, we can't erect new systems and processes that are so permanent that we wouldn't tear them down when they're irrelevant. And so it's really important to not do things that are so permanent in nature that you couldn't undo them or change them when you find out that they've served their purpose and they might no longer be relevant.